Hello there everybody, Sam Strains here, welcome back to the railway and all that rubbish etc. Come in and sit down because it's been over 4 years since my original Lemon Locomotives video, which was a grim celebration of the various locos I've reviewed with faults or design flaws. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's been a lot more locos like that since then. So strap yourselves in, settle down, get ready and look out, because here it comes, Lemon Locomotives 2024 edition. I've heard that life gives you lemons, but sometimes Hornby does as well. The first lemon comes from them, and it is this, the Hornby Hush Hush, which is admittedly an amazing and unusual looking model with a fantastic level of detail, and hey, it was even pretty well built as well. But the original version of this I reviewed had an awful lot of issues. The first design flaw is the trailing wheels. They look absolutely awful floating above the track like that, and certainly not realistic. A truly horrible bit of sloppiness from Hornby there that we're going to see quite a bit in today's video. The non-drivers are not properly sprung either, so the model is quite horribly balanced. So much so that on parts of my layout, the entire weight of the loco was taken by the front bogie and those rear pony wheels, leaving the loco completely unable to move itself. I could live with these issues though, but unfortunately when I went to run my original Hush Hush, it couldn't make it around the layout without stalling. It kept stopping, grinding to a halt, and I had no idea why. In fact, I never found out what the actual problem was. I did lots of probing and digging to try and find out, couldn't figure it out. So in the end, that original model went back to Hornby, but unfortunately they'd all sold out, so I couldn't get it replaced. I had to wait many months for the next set of Hush Hushes to come in stock, and that's when I bought this one. And thankfully this Hush Hush runs absolutely fine, except it's still got the issue of those rear wheels looking absolutely horrible. But on the plus side, I now have a Hush Hush that I can run, so to an extent, that is problem solved. The next Lemon is a model that frankly failed to impress me in basically every area. It is this, the Fell locomotive by KR Models. And things started off quite oddly from the moment I opened the box, because when I pulled this thing out, the thing almost blinded me. It was so glossy and shiny that it looked just like an amateurish toy. Now, I tried to be nice and say, well, in real life, locomotives like this have metal bodies and they are shiny, and that is true. However, putting it next to other diesels in my collection, it just looks like a shiny, plasticky toy. It looks silly. But it's not just the finish of the Fell that makes the model look silly, the detailing is pretty laughable as well. It's got cheap wobbly plastic handrails, not just around the cab doors, but on the loco bonnets as well. And the underframe detail looks so coarse and awful, some of the worst quality moulding I've ever seen. It's actually quite shocking that this was a new model and not a 40-year-old re-release or something. Online, those who know much more about the real Fell than I do also had serious complaints about the accuracy of the model too, saying that I think one side of the model is inaccurate. Now I have to admit, as a casual enthusiast, that is not something that I noticed, but if it's true, that's pretty preposterous for a very expensive model that's supposed to be accurate and authentic. But so far, this is just a lazy model. It's not a Lemon so far, and that's what I thought until, of course, I put it onto the track. Yeah, it was not a good performer. It was very underpowered. If I put my finger in front of it, it would have almost no torque whatsoever. And the pickups were so unreliable that the loco would constantly stop and hesitate as it ran. Embarrassingly bad for a new model. So I found myself dismantling the thing and doing what the factory obviously couldn't, and that was, adjust the pickups correctly. So yeah, the Fell looks like a toy, runs like a lemon. For the next portion of unfortunate lemony badness, we go back to Hornby with this, the Railroad Plus 1400. And this is what we call a historical lemon, because this tooling has been creating lemons for many, many decades now. Poor pickups plagued the early Airfix versions of these models, but more recently dodgy pickups have let the Hornby versions of it down as well. In fact, on one occasion, a retailer told me that a whole batch of these had to go back to Hornby from the model shops to have their pickups modified before they'd actually work properly. One release also had no proper springing to the rear axle, which meant that when you put the thing on the track, a pair of the driving wheels were actually not touching the rails, and the clincher was those were the wheels that had the rubber traction tyres on them, so the model couldn't pull at all. Then of course there was this release, the 2024 release, and despite having extra pickups which I thought would solve the problems, the reliability of this loco on the track was still absolutely poor. It continued stopping and stuttering, and actually I can't understand why. I took this apart several times and adjusted the pickups, making sure they were making good contact with the wheels. I'd put it back onto the track, it would be fine for a second, and then the problems would come right back. And then, to make things worse, when I was trying to run this in on the rolling road, not on the track of course, because it wouldn't run around the track, I found that the loco suddenly stopped dead, and I thought it had burnt out. But it hadn't burnt out. A piece of adhesive sponge had broken free inside the model and had become lodged inside the motor, which could have caused it to melt down and become quite dangerous. So why the factory were fitting these pads so close to the motor armature that it could grab them and get stuck in there, I just don't know. But it was one of those reviews that ended up taking absolutely ages, about twice as long as it should have done. So yeah, a real lemon, the last one I will ever buy, the Hornby Railroad Plus 1400. Railroad minus. The next lemon comes from Rapido, who shouldn't really be in this video because they do have incredibly high standards and they do seem to care about their models, but they also seem to have a knack for repeatedly letting issues slip through, and that's very true of this, the 15XX. And it wasn't so much the performance that made this a lemon, but rather the horrible build quality. It had a deeply wonky chimney, which has become a bit of a Rapido staple. It had been glued in this wonky position too, so there was no fixing it. It had many other wonky or broken parts, such as the steps, the smokebox door detailing, so more than one item on the smokebox door alone, and many other parts besides that. There was also copious glue splattered all over the model, making it look basically like a complete mess. And this model is a lesson to all manufacturers really. It's all very well designing complex models with all the detail in the world, but at the end of the day they've got to be assembled by humans in a factory, hundreds or even thousands of units at a time. And it seems that this model was just a step too far for the factory to manage, as lots of other people reported similar problems as well. So this model was so bad that I did decide to return it to Rapido, and they were great and they sent me a replacement, which I really appreciated. And the replacement, which is what I've got here actually, was much better, but it still had a few build quality issues and visible glue, etc., which kind of backs up what I was saying about the over complexity of the model. The performance though wasn't as bad, at least not bad enough for it to make this a lemon by itself, but the performance was still a bit naff. It had no torque to it, no real power in the mechanism, and it would slow down in an extremely dire manner on the curves/gradient, and not even with a massive load either. It also had a nasty wobble to it as well, but the replacement I got was much better in that department. So the replacement I've got here I would say is not a lemon. The original one I reviewed though absolutely was. The next lemon is an N-gauge loco, and when I did my last Lemon Locomotives video, I didn't review N-gauge models, but I do now, of course, and most of the N-gauge stuff I've looked at has been extremely good, except for one of them, and that was this. It is the Dapol Britannia class. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty good looking model, and really there was nothing about the build quality in particular that would make this a lemon. It was the mechanism and performance that massively let this one down. So the mechanism on the whole is just really nasty and dated. It's got a large motor in the tender which connects to the loco via a drawbar, but because the motor, the heavy bit, is in the tender and not in the loco itself is a bit lightweight and not able to haul very much. So to combat that, they put traction tyres on the thing. And the rubber traction tyres obviously solve the traction issues, but they insulate the wheels they're fitted to, which stops them picking up power. and as a result this loco constantly stopped as I was trying to review it. It was also far from a smooth runner. It was very jerky and stuttery too, making it a complete nightmare to run. On top of that, Britannia derails constantly. I couldn't run this backwards over points and curves because it would just immediately derail. And this was not a cheap model, so the fact that this would constantly derail and cause me problems was just shocking and obviously unacceptable to me. And I'm not proud of this, but I have to admit that this model did get the better of me at one point. I've not told you this before, but during a subsequent review, not a review of this loco, I decided that I would run the Britannia next to the loco I was reviewing, and it was just a complete nightmare. I'd be trying to say a sentence and this loco would stop. So I'd stop what I was saying, I'd give it a nudge, it'd carry on, I'd continue what I was saying. I'd get to the next sentence and the thing derailed again. So I'm annoyed at this point. I put the loco back on the track, I start again. It then derails again, taking the whole train with it. At this point I'm absolutely fuming. I have to stop again what I'm saying and put the whole train back on the track, after which the thing derailed once again, crashing into the loco I was reviewing. And I have to admit that at this point I lost it. I grabbed Britannia off the track and dashed it against the wall, and it smashed into a million pieces. Now, it's funny now, but obviously this is not cool. I'm not proud of losing my temper like that, and it's something that I almost never do, but I have to admit it made me feel a lot better. And obviously I paid for it in the end because I had to sit down and painstakingly rebuild the loco, which as you can see has gone back together okay. And to the loco's credit, it does now work again, well, about as well as it did before. So I guess it's quite a hardy little thing, but ultimately a complete lemon, and I don't recommend buying it unless of course you want to end up throwing it against a wall. And now we come to the final lemon, a lemon that's just been found at the bottom of the barrel and it's gone slightly mouldy. It's what I consider to be a letdown lemon, a model that was touted to be something truly special indeed, but was an epic fail when I finally reviewed it. And the model I'm talking about is this. It is the new Hornby Black 5, a multifaceted lemon. As you can see, this is a massively complex model with tons of detail. But like the 15XX by Rapido, this was partly Hornby's undoing here. The thing was just covered in glue. It had visible smudges, fingerprints, and glue misting spoiling the finish of the model. But it didn't end there. A massive feature marketed by Hornby for the Black 5 was the inclusion of working lamps, which could be removed and repositioned as you like. But the execution of this feature was completely botched. So first, the pre-fitted lamps had been glued to the model at the factory, and as parts that are supposed to be interchangeable, this completely defeated the object of them. They were designed to be friction fitted to the loco, so they shouldn't have been glued in. So Hornby were fouled by their own factory there then, but it's no excuse. Hornby should have specified to the factory that those parts shouldn't have been glued in, and they should have also been checking that the models were built as specified. It shouldn't have taken Sam's trains to reveal that these models had not been built properly. But if by some miracle you are able to switch the lamps around, which wasn't easy for me because the quality of the lamps was so low that one of mine actually had a missing part, which meant it couldn't be fitted at all, you're then faced with the problem of light leakage around the lamps themselves, where the bright LEDs can be seen shining through the gaps. So for me, Hornby should have just taken a little bit longer on this feature, making sure it was developed correctly so that it worked as intended. Because this was supposed to be an impressive feature which elevated these Black 5s to a new level, and instead it was just an embarrassing disaster. But the cherry on top was that when I tried to run the loco, it kept stopping dead. Not because of dodgy pickups this time, but because of the dodgy loco to tender drawbar. Now this is weird because this was not the first time that Hornby had used this drawbar design, and on the previous models that used it, they ran absolutely fine. But unfortunately the Black 5 did not, and many people have reported the same problems with it. And no matter what I did, I could not get this to run properly. I cleaned the contacts, I tried adjusting things, nothing seemed to work. So unfortunately, I sent my Black 5 back for a replacement. And the replacement did exactly the same thing. It would run fine on the straight, but as soon as it reached a curve, it would stop dead, exactly as the first example did. But rather than sending the model back a second time, I decided to do Hornby's quality control for them and fix the issue myself. Now, fortunately this time cleaning the contacts did solve the problem, and after that the Loco did work okay. But obviously by this point my experience of this supposedly ultimate Black 5 had just been entirely fouled, leaving me with nothing but a sour, lemony taste in my mouth. The ultimate lemon. But anyway, they were some of the lemons that I've experienced over the past few years. Please do comment down below and let me know if you've experienced any lemons, and if you've got some stories to share, that's even better. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Look out for those lemons, they'll get you in the end and they'll draw your lips back if you accidentally ingest one of them. So take care, look out, unstrap yourselves, go forth into the world and avoid those lemons. Goodbye folks, goodbye.